Welcome to the 12th station. I'm Jim Maughan, and I'm with my good friend, Mr. Bug Hall.
Hi,
How you doing, Bug?
I'm always good.
Good, man. I know you are, sir. Well, listen, today's discussion is something honest people see everywhere. We're surrounded by lies and twisted narratives, and they're called facts. And we're calling today's discussion the tyranny of silence. Now, we just went through 2 years of civil rights abuses in the name of public health. And if you don't agree with that, well, we can't even debate it here for being shut down and deplatformed. But one thing is certain: standing up for right, combating the lies that the anointed, to borrow a phrase from our the esteemed Thomas Sowell, comes at a cost, a very high cost. Let's look at just a couple, and then we're going to jump into it, Bug. All right, these I'm gonna lay out for you just some of the stuff I thought of off the top of my head. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller. He was a guy who came out and said that it was unacceptable in Afghanistan. What we did, we left people behind. Well, what happened to him? This is something that everybody knew. We left $85 billion of armaments on the ground there. He was summarily fired, lost his pension, and I believe got divorced in the process. Right, drummed out of the Marine Corps. Archbishop Vigano. He's a guy you probably know about him. He's a guy who actually came out and had the temerity to tell the truth, and he's in hiding. Father James Altman, canceled. They kicked him out of his rectory. Kyle Rittenhouse, that kid barely got away with it without going to jail for a long time. Thank God. Brett Kavanaugh, look what they did to him. Russia collusion, what they did to Donald Trump. Burning down cities defined as mostly peaceful protest, Bug. How about that one? Gender, it's a social contract. It's a social construct. Ridiculous. Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. Huh? America is a horrible place founded on systemic racism and white privilege. The parents who speak up at school board meetings in Virginia, the FBI, they're actually targeting these people, right? Bug, let's start the conversation. And I just want to say this before we get started. We're not sitting here from sort of some sanctimonious high perch. We understand, because I'll tell you something. I have put up with tyrant bosses in my life. I had a mortgage and a child and a family, and I just shut up. And there are times when and do me a favor. I know you have a lot of thoughts on this. You and I have discussed this. What are you thinking?
Well, just to reiterate your idea about not being sanctimonious, my self-cancellation video, I talked a lot about my decades of silence, especially post conversion, and it's hard, man. I was completely aware of the fact that my career would be over.
Yep.
If I ever spoke up in a meeting, or you're sitting around Netflix, or you're sitting out around a writer's room or whatever, and you hear the most horrible ideologies and the most awful things, and there's that part of you, right, that as Jiminy Cricket calls it, that still quiet voice inside you, the conscience, it speaks up, and you don't. The conscience, it nags you. I think it's a great poison in the spiritual life. I think that silence, that unholy silence, is a great poison. I also think that, I've said before, as goes the church, so goes the world.
Yes.
I think there's an important thing that's happening right now. I think the church, and when I say the church, I don't mean the church, proper as the mystical body of Christ. I mean the hierarchy, the hirelings. At some point, they decided that courting the world's affection was the way to go. Right now, that vice is called human respect. The vice of human respect is caring more about what people think of you,
Yes.
or the consequences of what people think of you, than caring about our Lord. Right. So the church kind of went that way, and the enemies of Christ just moved. Because here's the thing: when you give in to a bully, when you stay quiet, it doesn't go away.
No.
What happens is the bolstering only grows, right? The bullying only grows. The enemies become more brazen. So we taught the world that hatred for the supernatural good was an acceptable position, and that it wasn't going to be fought back. And now those enemies have have broadened from the supernatural good to a hatred of even the natural good, right? The most
Yes.
basic natural goods
Yes.
now are on the table. They're now on the table to be picked and pulled apart because there's nobody guarding them. And we're all complicit to a certain degree. We've all bit our tongue or held our silence when we shouldn't have.
Yes, if I could, Bug, I'll take it in a slight, basically a little different direction. But thinking about when you think about it, particularly as a man, and a lot of men watch this show, our societal value is in the resources that we bring to the table. Fair enough, right? Well, and this is the part that's really tough to admit. And so, because that's so important, and I'm not saying it's easy because you're looking at children you got to feed and everything else, but because our societal value is so intertwined with that, we'll shut up, and we're seeing it everywhere. And I find it interesting because take, for example, when you brought up about the Catholic Church, and I thought it was a very good one. As the church goes, so does society. It's the firewall of Western civilization, and that's not an overstatement.
Mm.
What made Western civilization great, I will always say, and I would argue, is Rome. Rome and the Catholic Church is what has contributed most to the greatest civilization in the history of the world, right?
Yep.
So now all of a sudden we find ourselves, and I would argue for the first time that I think in history, where we have a hierarchy in place that is basically adhering to a philosophy of secular humanism. I don't think that's a stretch. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So look, historically, the humanists have always been, call it the left wing of the church, right? They've
Sure.
always been there. There have all, and some of them have walked the borderline between Orthodox Catholicism and dabbling in humanism, and then you've always had the far left humanists. Now, Marxism didn't exist yet, right? But those people existed. The ones who naturalize the faith and forget that it's really Christ in charge, and push social justice agendas. They were just different social justice agendas, and
As opposed to salvation, which
right,
is the main right, which is the main goal, which is the absolute purpose of the church.
right. And the great irony is, there are some sects of Christianity who would accuse Catholics of holding a gospel of works, but it's really the humanists who are promoting essentially the gospel of works, right? It's that idea that if you don't get on board with whatever flavor of the month, social justice nonsense, the world has on the table today, then then you're sinning somehow, because I don't want to support certain quote unquote rights that aren't really rights or whatever. But here's the thing: is faithful Catholics who actually stand up and speak up and say, no, that's not true. Actually, here's the facts. Those have always been the ones who have kept at bay this onslaught. And we stopped doing that at a certain point. It was really
Sure.
around the 60s. We all, historically, if you look at it historically, there was a big tuning out. There was a large, and it really comes out of the error of Americanism, right? There is a defined heresy called Americanism.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And it comes out of that, right? It comes out of the idea that once you separate church and state, your duties to secularism, the church is supposed to just run on her own. You don't really have much duty to that. You follow the rules, but you don't have a duty to the church. You have a duty to your country and all those things. Once you've separated those out, I think a lot of the loudest voices in Catholicism, which were American Catholics for a long time, stopped speaking up because they were just focused on other things.
Yes. Yeah. Fair enough. And I think that there was a real concerted effort to actually shift this. And much like a lot of major lies, they veiled it in virtue.
Right.
Well, we have to really get down and help people out. Of course we do. There's no question about that. In fact, faith without works is dead, right? There's no dead. But the church has, and I think you pinpointed it in the 1960s. I would have to agree with you. The church has always been about salvation, good acts, and acts, is particularly in the name of Christ, were a natural sort of extenuation of that, of your salvation. It was not the main purpose, And if I could, Bug, kind of transition a little bit, because I think it's an interesting question, right? One of the things is that, okay, why is this the case? And I believe it's an element of human nature, survival, right? Correct me, if you disagree, tell me. But it seems to me that even back, whether it's the caveman days, we lived in communities, and what happened was the strong emerging leader, right, sort of called the shots, and then survival depended on following that guy. Now, take it a step further, as economics advanced, and now all of a sudden there was a real payoff to going along to get along, and it's become so intertwined with our nature that our human nature, I would argue, is open to follow the path of least resistance. What do you think of that?
No,
Generally.
I think you're spot on, right? I mean, look, whether you're a career-minded person with an office job, or you're starting your own company, because a lot of people have this idea that if they start their own companies, they're not going to have these issues.
Oh.
But you still have a board and investors, and all sorts of things. You have customers that are mostly entrenched in the social justice ideologies that are wreaking havoc on our culture. So it almost seems like no matter where you go, if you don't tote the line, you can and will likely be destroyed for it.
Yes.
And for me, and this is not a solution for most people, I don't think, but for me, embracing poverty ahead of time was particularly to face that problem. That was, yes, I want to unite myself to our Lord's poverty and all the beautiful saints who have grabbed hold of Lady Poverty as a means to heaven. But it was also a kind of survival mechanism. The idea that I want to be a genuine person. I want to have integrity. I want to speak the truth when I'm confronted with lies. And I knew that I had to first take everything from myself, so that no one would be able to threaten taking anything from me, right? That was the goal. The goal was, if I have nothing to lose, or as little as possible to lose, then there's less leverage. There's just less that anyone can take from you. It's why the poor saints, like St. Francis, were the loudest and the boldest. St. Francis had nothing to lose. He slept on a rock, right? His pillow was a rock. And what are you going to take from him? His hair shirt? He was able to just tell the truth. And there's that beautiful vision the Pope had of the entire church being held up by one man, and it was St. Francis, right? And that's because the truth, our Lord said of himself that I am the way, the truth, and the life. I think we've taken for granted that the truth is something that we don't have to speak up on, or that we don't have to bang the drum over.
Oh, yeah.
Let's just go along to get along. Let's not ruffle any feathers. The world was entrenched in religious wars for 400 years, and we're past that. Let's just smile and nod and placate each other. The problem is, delayed conflict is always a greater conflict, and you can't escape it, right? That's not peace. Delayed conflict is not peace.
No.
It's in fact, it's the opposite of peace. Peace is the tranquility of order. So if we don't start speaking the truth and facing those uncomfortable conversations early on, then they're going to grow. And when it hits the fan, it's only going to be 1,000 times worse.
You've said this before, Bug, and I'd appreciate you jumping in and actually articulating it the way you said it. But somehow, and particularly, we talk to a lot of men, we're not supposed to say things that are contentious or offensive.
Right.
Well,
yeah.
Well, in the first place, no. The
Right.
charity, by its very definition, is wanting the best for another. So, if you're going to speak up, but you again, we've had these kind of conversations. We have gotten to a point right now where men have been so emasculated, right, that to disagree is all of a sudden you're abusive. How do we get here? And I think, and I'm gonna, if you could comment on this, but I would say the biggest, which I found very heartening, was remember, I thought it was really funny when you were saying you were all psyched when they shut down the schools. It was like, yep, there we go, right? But one of the great things that came out of that was all these parents were like, what is going on? And they were listening to these Zoom classrooms. But this is absolute nonsense, and they went ballistic. And that, and I'm hoping that keeps up. But do me a favor, man, take that a little bit, because you really speak to this very well. Where do we get to the point where men don't speak directly, and we're not allowed to have an opinion, and any opinion that goes against the anointed is, you're going to pay a price, dude.
Yeah, well, so there's the obvious, we've been touching on the obvious one, which is the broader scope of social justice stuff and social norms, things that are now taboo to speak against, right?
Sure.
But you touched on something really important, is that all conflict, all contention at a certain point became wrong, right?
Yes.
Just broad scope immoral to just contend with someone's error. I had an old business partner who was constantly telling me that people didn't like me and I was too contentious or whatever. The funny thing is I would always ask other people, and I was hard pressed to find people that actually really held that opinion of me.
I know where you're going with this. This is so weak. Go ahead.
But the thing is he's younger than me by 7 years or so.
Sure.
So he was right on the cusp. I was right at the end of a time when everyone, for the most part, just sort of spoke plainly to each other. And if you were out of line, you were very likely to get into a fist fight. You were very likely to come to blows over a disagreement. Sometimes you would realize you were wrong, or the other guy would realize he was wrong. Sometimes not, but you would have respect for each other because you both spoke plainly. And now you can just disagree and move past it. At a certain point, they really demonized that. And I've talked about this in other videos.
Yes.
They started calling in the cops for simple fistfights, right? So
yes.
he spoke entirely in that time period. Never was in a fist fight in his whole life. Never, never really disagreed with anyone in a plain manner. So what happens is, and this is the danger of silence. What happens is resentment, contention, right? It just gets buried, and you end up with this sort of effeminate, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Well, it's all the more true. Hell hath no fury like a soy boy scorned, right? When you don't speak plainly, when you don't tell the truth, when you don't, when you're disingenuous in your speech, especially, your conscience is being nagged. And it just festers, right?
Yes.
There's that old quote. I wish I knew who it was. Maybe it was St. Thomas Aquinas, but forgive me if I'm wrong. Anger is like a poison that you mean for the other to take, but you take yourself.
Yes, right. I know what you mean by that. Right.
And I think that's really true of that sort of silent resentment that starts to build when you're not speaking plainly, when you're not just telling the truth. In all fronts, whether it's theological differences that need to be worked out, and very often you realize you're kind of saying the same thing and using different language anyway, or whether it's the highest level of actually a man is born with a certain biological set of things that distinguishes him from women who are born with a certain biological set of things, and there's no nuance. I won't play games of nuance with that one because it's as plain as it goes in your face, right? The murder of unborn children is precisely that. It's murder. There's no subtle nuance to it. There's no, well, circumstantially. Now, it can be an act of murder that was someone was lied to and greatly confused from decades of indoctrination.
Yeah, or they're lied to by the culture.
Right.
Yes.
That certainly is true, but
Sure.
it doesn't change the material of the sin.
Yes.
It only changes the subjective side of it. And I'm a big fan of looking at the subjective side and recognizing that is absolutely a part of a sin. But we have to stop playing the nuance game. I've often used the phrase "the tyranny of nuance." I know we're calling this one the tyranny of silence, but the tyranny of nuance is a big problem because people want to shift entirely to the subjective side of error or sin and say, well, how can you really say, because they didn't know, right? You can't call a heretic because maybe they're just a material heretic, but they're not a formal heretic, or they don't know, therefore their heresy is, they're not culpable for it. Well, so what? Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
right. Please forgive the interruption. Have you seen the stock market this last week? Many are losing sleep over their vulnerability with current markets, inflation, and the insane current monetary and fiscal policies. Our sponsor, St. Joseph Partners, is in the business of helping you own physical precious metals to protect your wealth. What about protecting your wealth in, say, retirement plans? If you've considered gold IRAs before, you may have been surprised at the standard costs. After all, we are dealing with real assets as opposed to digits on your screen. St. Joseph Partners is offering free setup to 12-station customers. We waive that cost completely and are offering free first-year admin fees. We serve more than the retirement market as well. Perhaps you may have wanted to add some gold to, or begin diversifying or add to your position. We will step you through the process and make it easy. We don't sell high premium collector coins that bury investors like the firms you see advertised on mainstream media. We sell bullion, sold close to spot, and that will begin benefiting as gold moves higher. Lastly, if you know any friends or family members who are in the market for metals, send them our way. We'll send you a gift of some precious metals with a referral to thank you. Nothing has protected wealth like gold over the centuries, weathering every storm imaginable. The timing seems urgent to be sure to be properly diversified. If your financial advisor talks you out of physical metals, get him and us on the phone together. We think you'll learn a lot, and just to see how superficial, if not negligent, the arguments are from the financial advisors who chronically fail to allocate clients to gold and other precious metals. Anyway, St. Joseph Partners, that's www.stjosephpartners.com or 610-326-2000. Now back to our show.
God love them. I don't judge anybody. That's the great thing about trying to just follow principles is I don't have to judge one way or the other about anything, but we should call out a sin for what it is. We should call out biology for what it is. We should call out error for what it is, just plainly as we can with our finite minds.
Brug, that was excellent. That was well put. And what I loved about what you were saying was this whole thing we're doing here is about principles. Look, life is messy, man. We get that. Remember our discussion on daycare? We got some bad comments on that. No, listen, we get that. What we're talking about is let's not deviate from the principles. Okay.
Can I touch on something real quick?
Yeah, please, man.
Daycare got brought up. My mother ran a daycare.
That's right.
That's what she did for a living. Now, when Father mentioned that's something that I've already accepted as true. When Father mentioned that in our talk, there was an emotional reaction interiorly. It didn't come across on the screen because I guard my emotions, but there was an emotional reaction to defend my mother. That's the problem, right?
Wow, that's so cool that you're saying this. Yeah, go ahead.
And it's an important point because
yes, it is.
Because my knee-jerk emotional response was well, but people don't know, was to defend the exceptions, to defend the subjective. And I already accept the horrors of daycare on the development of children, right? The spiritual, psychological, and physical development of children.
Your mom ran a great operation. You know what I mean? Like
she absolutely did, right? I mean, she's one of the most loving, gentle women you'll ever meet. Fun, educational, not an ounce of leftist nonsense in it, right?
Yep.
But I stopped myself and went, wait, I already accept this as true, and I'm already wanting to respond emotionally in defense of something that I love, right?
Yes.
So I get how we get there. I get how these conversations descend into the tyranny of nuance. And I stopped myself and I said, we're talking about principles right now. Let's talk about these principles because it's important, and let's state them plainly without doing a tiptoe dance around the subjective aspect of it. Because look, when you start talking about the subjective, here's part of the problem. Part of the problem is subjective means subjective to almost every individual, right?
Sure.
So you can try to sweep with a broad stroke and cover some of the subjective aspect when you're giving practical advice or things like that. But if your goal is to comfort every single person, the only way to do that is to diminish the principle or muddy it in a way that it's no longer clear. And then nobody benefits. Nobody can apply the thing. You're going to have people who reject it, and that's fine. There's nothing you can do about that. But for those who don't want to reject it, for those who would hear it and appropriate to themselves and try to figure out how to apply it in their own life, right? Because that's maturity. Maturity is the application of principles. For those people, for their sake, that is what charity is, right? And I said this in my cancellation video. I think it's an affront to human dignity to coddle, to try and coddle every individual during the expression of principles, because you're not giving them the dignity of their free will to choose, right? You're trying to dumb it down and play a game with them. You're essentially, and I know you said, people might say, well, you're doing it for a good cause. You're essentially manipulating them, right?
Wow.
That's what you're doing when
Yes.
you're coming down a principle in order to coddle someone's emotions. You're manipulating them to slowly reel them in instead of stating the thing plainly and letting them, as a person with a free will, who God respects your free will even unto hell. All right. And I said this in my self-cancellation video. And then we're suddenly going to not do that. We're suddenly going to manipulate someone's free will by muddying the intellect and trying to draw them into a half truth. I think it's abhorrent.
Bug, honestly, that was so well said, especially with the example you had given about you growing up and your mom being in charge of a daycare and your initial, vitriol, your response, and how you because I must say, one of the things that I find really interesting is, and you just cleared it up for me, you brought it up earlier, abortion. Of course, people are in horrendous situations. Oh my gosh. I mean, and I'm sorry, just because I'm a man doesn't mean I'm not allowed to discuss this subject. I refute that and dismiss it categorically. Tough. It's the way it is. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. But I find it interesting because every time that subject comes up, I have to steer the people away from the nuance. I have to tell them, look, I'm not sitting here talking about pulling people out of their homes and branding them with the scarlet letter. What I am telling you about is what I am saying to you is categorically abortion is murder. Okay. That's the way it is. Now, the culture has polluted us. If you had prior to 1973, most people would have agreed with that statement.
Right.
In the United States, little by little, incrementally, it got chipped away. And now all of a sudden is because of the tyranny of nuance, as you so eloquently put it. Well, where are we? Now not only is abortion not murder, it's virtue. This is insane.
And
Okay.
this is what happens with silence, right? It's the slow decline.
Yes.
And we can't see it in real time, which is why we're able to continually convince ourselves that silence is prudent, right? Carnal prudence is not prudence. Carnal prudence, the idea of applying something in a certain circumstance to get a material gain, right? Some lower natural good or what, that is not prudence. Prudence particularly pertains to the supernatural good in some way, right?
Yes.
salvation, whatever. Carnal prudence, we've got to stop playing this game that, well, it's not a big deal if I don't say this in the plainest way, or I skirt around the topic, because the slow decline has been going on for a very long time now, and we've been allowing it. And at this point, the only solution, the only way to solve this is to start making people uncomfortable, is to start just saying things the way they are. It's going to take an army of people just stating the truth plainly. And you see that on a natural level. People are waking up from that. You've got the Ben Shapiro's with his catchphrase, "Facts don't care about your feelings."
Yes.
You're seeing the natural response, because we all have a disdain for lies, right?
Yes.
It's not just a supernatural thing. Although as Catholics, we have something higher than the natural good. Obviously, we have the supernatural good, and speaking the truth is both materially good, because speech is part of the natural law. And that's an important distinction that a lot of people don't know. Speech is part of the natural law. It's for the sake of expressing something true. So you can't even tell a lie without breaking the natural law, right? That's a big pill for people.
Yeah, that really is. Which actually, it's an excellent segue, because as you know about our high tech things around here, we have. I know this is very expensive sound effects we have here. That's the solutions part of the show here, and you lined it up very nicely as we're kind of walking over to this, and you started, I think let's start the solutions part of the show by saying this: awareness, real accountability. That let's start out by saying, okay, what can we do about this? Let's start out by saying what it is, because we've all been conditioned to go along to get along. Well, where are we now? You know what I'm saying? And to your point about Ben Shapiro, I like listening to Ben Shapiro a lot. I find his reasoning pretty straightforward. Actually, I find his reasoning excellent. He has suffered some slings and arrows. He is pro-life. He is an observant Jew, and he has pointed out very, I think, eloquently, that laws come from God. That's ultimately the source. And if you don't understand that, and again, starting with solutions, if you don't understand the fact that laws are derived from God, that's where laws are derived from. That there is, in fact, in this universe, what we call an absolute truth. If you want, I don't know, if you want my wristwatch or something, you don't have the right, no matter what, to put a bullet in my head and take it.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Let's start there. And I think that, if I could, Bug, and I really like your opinion on this, and I think that a great quote to start with is Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And I think it says, the simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. One word of truth outweighs the world. Right. And I think that the Gulag Archipelagos is a tremendous book, but understanding what is happening to you, and the fact that to get along, and we make all sorts of compromises, we've got to stop. We've got to stop, because a very small segment of society, I'm going to call it a very small minority, is incredibly energized, and they're bullies, and they've taken over and they've hijacked the narrative. So you start there. What do you think of that? I mean, basically.
Yeah. So that's exactly where you have to start. So St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, they both say that no one can do evil for evil's sake, right? No person can do evil for evil's sake. You do evil for a perceived good.
Okay.
Whether that's a moment of pleasure, whether that's power or money or convenience, right? There's some perceived good. Now, I think a lot of people who are disingenuous in their speech, I think the perceived good is an emotional good, right? It's some aspect of the misapplication of being nurturing or caring, or what's miscalled charity. And this is the hardest group to talk to about this, right? This is the hard, because this group genuinely sees that the little white lies, the disingenuous speech, that there is a great good in it. And here's my challenge to that group. Here's my challenge to those people. I would say this. I would say run an experiment, right? Let's say for Lent, you are not going to say a single thing that's even disingenuous, right? It doesn't necessarily mean you have to speak every truth all the time, but you at least can't lie, right? You
Right.
can't.
Don't use truth as a weapon. Okay. In
Right.
other words, right.
Right. You don't have,
Yeah.
I like speaking the truth in every opportunity that I can, because the world is entrenched in lies, and I think it's a great good. But I'm not saying everyone is called to do that.
Sure.
Just don't say anything untrue or disingenuous. Do it for the entirety of Lent. See how you feel, because I promise you, I know this for a fact. The effect that just that little thing will have on your spiritual life, the peace, the tranquility of your own soul, not having the constant stir of the conscience. And here's the crazy thing is, even with that perceived good that you think you're pursuing by the little white lie, whether you've deadened your conscience to it or not, it's still there, because speech is part of the natural law. It's written on our hearts.
Yes.
You don't actually have to know the principle, right? Just like murder, you don't have to know the principle behind murder. It's part of the natural law. It's written on your heart.
Right.
The natural law, when you go against the natural law, even the small things, ignorance does not shield your conscience, right? So I would say do that. Now, I know for a fact you're going to find that you feel better. You just, in general, you're going to be praying better. Everything's going to take off like a rocket. And then set the challenge longer. Go a year, go 2 years, just telling the truth, right? And then start speaking up more frequently. And what you'll find is the people that you were afraid were going to hate you. Some of them might, right? But there's going to be a whole new category of people who see you as somebody with integrity. They'll begin to see you, instead of being a frivolous person who always has the kindest thing to say, or always has some platitude. You'll start to be seen as a person with gravitas and integrity, right?
Wow.
Whether you're a man or a woman, this is really about men, but it goes for women too. You'll be seen as someone dependable, someone that people want to go to for advice, which is terrifying to me, by the way, because don't come to me for advice. I always say the same thing when people ask me advice. I don't know your circumstances. I'm the last guy to ask. I can help you walk through some principles, but I'm very cautious about giving advice to anybody.
But going back to principles, that's a great point, and you can very much help somebody with that, because
people will see you that way. They will start to see you. Now, you might not want to give anyone advice. I strongly recommend you don't. But people will start to come to you, and you'll be confused. You'll go, "Why is everyone looking to me like I'm I know things?" Because honesty is just one of the deepest marks of a man, of virtue, of sanctification.
yes.
And man, it will be the greatest reward you've probably ever given yourself if you do that for any period of time. So that's my commentary on those people. Now, there's a whole other category of people who are afraid to lose things. They're afraid to lose jobs. They're afraid to lose their children, right? If they in public say that discipline is good and I spank my children, right? Where I lived in California, that could genuinely be problematic. That could genuinely be something that someone might send the cops to my house for, just because I said it, right?
But by the way, do me a favor, drill down on this a little more. But I wanted to point, because a lot of people out there listening, and I know this for a fact, the children thing, especially when they get a little older, and in the interest of peace, they will compromise that virtue, right? Mm-hmm. In the interest of peace, they'll compromise their Christianity, their Catholicism, and in the end, you'll get none. but
Yeah.
please continue, because I think a lot of people are really interested in what you have to say about this. Go.
Look, so there's two sides to this. One, teach your kids to tell the truth, right?
Yeah.
That's a crucial thing. The most severe discipline that my children see, I think, is when they're dishonest. I don't mind rowdy kids. I certainly keep them in line when it's appropriate to, and I do my best. We all fail miserably with children.
Yep.
But I don't let any lie go unspoken to. My children know that lying is just about the worst thing that they can do at that age, and it's treated as a very serious thing. So that's that side of it. The other side of it is, when you go tell the truth, they will come after you, whoever they are, right? If it's your boss, if it's the mob, if it's the government, whatever it is, and they're going to take the things that you value. That's how tyrants work. They use the things you value as leverage. It's really that simple. So, I mean, it's the simplest principle. So whatever you value, they're going to come after. Your career, your financial means, and eventually your kids. I mean, we saw it in Russia from 1920 to 1960s. If you in any way went against the social norms of Marxism, of communism, your kids were the first leverage that they used. Yes. They knew that was a way to get people to go along, to get along. It was always the kids.
And by the way, society even held up to esteem and they have a statue, actually, of a young kid who turned his father in the Soviet Union. And I forget the kid's name, but I was like, wow, that is just.
And that was, and the irony is that entire culture was built on teaching people to be disingenuous, right? Teaching them to backbite and sneer and turn each other in.
Spy on each other. And it was built on lies and that men are the same as women and the state is God. And, yeah.
And here's the thing, I can't tell anyone what to do if they come for your kids, right? I mean, that's between you and God. I will say this, though, in Russia, what happened to those children that were taken and put into government institutions was the absolute worst kind of horrors you can possibly imagine. So, that's a leverage that they have against you. If you're a father, there's no getting around that one, right? That's the one that I can't. I said I gave everything up, so they have nothing to take from me. That's the one that obviously is always going to be there. But we have an example of this. We have beautiful examples of saintly people, both in communist Russia and in the earliest days of the church. Look at the martyrs. The martyrs believed that if they taught their kids to be bold, if they taught their kids, my daughter, my 4-year-old, she likes to write letters to her mother. She loves her mother so much, but she can't write yet, right? So she says, can I tell you a letter from mommy? And I'll write it in crayon for her. And they're always like a couple sentences, 4 sentences or whatever. One of the recent ones, it said, I love you, mommy. Today's a great day to be a martyr. Viva Cristo Rey. I love you, mommy. That was it, right? Now, the reality is, we have examples of these beautiful young saints who loved our Lord with their whole heart, right? Saint Nellie of Holy God is a great example. And you've got these young martyrs. And it's a trust in God that is it's the greatest trust you'll ever have to put in God if you're in that situation, right?
Well, that's beautiful, yeah.
It's gut-wrenching to even think about, but you should.
Yeah. Because you got me on that example, to be honest with you, when you were talking about the Soviet Union, and the one thing they had was to take your kids away, and you knew that what would happen to them would be unspeakable,
right?
I don't know what to say about that. I guess, can you continue on that, because I'm sure a lot of people are listening, going, "Oh my gosh, where does faith end?"
I will.
That's a tough one.
I will go peacefully. I will go peacefully onto the train. I have already premeditated that and pondered it. If it ever happens in my lifetime, I will go peacefully onto the train and I will suffer well, hopefully, and I will, say my office if I have a breviary available to me. I will say my daily prayers. I will live a life of penance and suffering. But if they come for my children, I will not go peacefully. I have taught my children to be bold. I have taught them to be um, Catholics in every sense of the word. And if the last thing they see is their father defending them to the death, they will remember that the rest of their lives, no matter where they're taken off to, no matter
Wow.
what horrors they face. They will remember the value that I placed on Holy Mother Church and on our Lord, right, and on the cross. So that's my own. I can't tell anybody what to do if that day ever came for you. I can also say though that while it's inevitable at some point, doesn't necessarily mean that day's coming any day soon, right? It's more likely you'll lose your job, you'll lose the things you like.
Yes.
I mean, start sacrificing now. Start learning what real sacrifice is, so you're not afraid of it. One of the first things that we did was give up our second car. We didn't need to. We had it paid off. I donated it to someone that needed a car,
Oh,
um,
no.
simply because we need to we need to know what it's like to go without. And that is a small one. We overcame that, and we hardly even notice it anymore that we're a single car family. But ripping those little band-aids off voluntarily, I think, is the greatest way to prepare you to not be afraid when it's time to tell the truth, right? When your boss says, here, sign this, it's a document saying that you believe in all of these social justice norms, which happened to a friend of mine, by the way, at a
Yes.
company he worked for. The paper was put in front of him saying, you agree with all these things, and we're going to make you sign it because everything on here is something that our company promotes, and we want we want to be able to say everyone that works for us believes in what we believe in. And the guy, God bless him, he had the courage to say, I can't sign that,
Yes.
because I actually disagree with everything on it. And he was let go, and he went and did his own thing, and he's doing okay now. He's not in the position he was financially before that happened, but he did the right thing, and he can live with himself, right? So
Yes. And but and this is the kind of these are the really hard truths that we have to internalize. We're surrounded even with call them Catholics and Christians or whatever. There's a certain defense of Christianity or Catholicism that's cultural,
mm-hmm.
right? In other words, particularly, I'm thinking I'm Irish descent, Italians, very, very, very entwined to the church. But are we really Catholic, or is that just as I use the term, a vending machine?
Right.
Because when the rubber hits the road is exactly with what you're talking about, and I think and I really sort of believe this. We need a wake up call to really understand what is our faith, because it is being abused around us 24/7.
And there's all look, you can get into all the higher theological truths of the church, and all the simple theological truths, and you can get into that. But there's also a really simple thing you can do, right?
Yeah.
When you've told a lie, when you've stayed your tongue when you shouldn't have, right? When you betrayed your conscience, you have to remember that every time you betray your conscience, you're betraying our Lord, right? The cock crows 3 times.
Yes.
And that was me for a long time. I love the story of St. Peter. A lot of people, is it St. Luke's gospel? Yeah, I think it's St. Luke's gospel. Luke was Peter's assistant. Is it Luke or Mark? Someone correct me in the comments. Luke or Mark was St. Peter's assistant. So a lot of people consider that gospel to kind of be St. Peter's gospel, right? Because he would have dictated it directly to whether it was Luke or Mark. And it's only in that one that specifies that Peter ran away weeping bitterly, right?
Yes.
And that's such a good point, because every time we tell a lie, that's what we're committing. Our Lord is the truth, right? every time we don't defend it, we are betraying him in some little way. Close your eyes. Just close your eyes. Look at the face of our Lord in your mind's eye, right? In that moment, just do it for 15 seconds. Look at
Sure.
the thorns. Look at the bruises and the beating on his way to the cross, the people spitting on him. Just take that moment and think about our Lord. You don't even have to get into all the high theology of the church, which is the most beautiful thing that man has ever entered into man's intellect, right? You don't even need all of that. You betray our Lord on the way to the cross every time you do that. And I know that sounds maybe facile or simplistic or oversimplified, but it's also true.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And Bug, if I could, one of the takeaways in listening to you, which I really liked, we started out with this question of the tyranny of silence, and then we always hit that ridiculous dive signal, that we're going to talk about solutions. But what I'm thinking about, one of the things I think the biggest takeaway I've gotten, and you said some profound things, but two things: do your best and attempt to not lie no matter what, or
Yeah.
or at least and with a you want to talk about nuance. No, that doesn't mean you use truth as a weapon, right?
Right, you don't have to.
Yeah.
I do think that that truth is a good weapon.
Yes.
And I do think that if it is genuinely the truth, I don't think there are very many circumstances, if any, that telling the truth when a lie is presented is ever wrong. That doesn't mean everyone is called to do that all the time, right? Doesn't mean you have to. It doesn't,
I'm
doesn't
thinking
mean that your boss says something about his transgender. Well, I don't know if I can say that on here, about his confused child who has a 40% chance of suicide. It doesn't mean that when your boss says that, you have to shout from the back of the room, no, he's mentally ill.
No, but I was referring to your wife's new haircut. Oh, yeah. That kind of thing.
Right. That too. I'm notorious for not even noticing haircuts. I have that benefit, right?
Sure.
But
but the second thing was the
big solutions.
Oh.
I think the two biggest solutions is never ever be disingenuous in your speech. Never ever tell a lie with your speech. Really remember that speech is part of the natural law. When I was trying to get that, when I was trying to really appropriate that and to grow in that virtue, I wouldn't even tell jokes anymore that were untrue, that were just by speech untrue, which isn't a sin at all, of course. But it's nice to swing to the extreme sometimes until you can find your way back to the right place. So I wouldn't say anything that was untrue for a very long time.
Sure.
Just to try to get control of that desire to silence, or that desire to alter my speech in a way that isn't necessarily untrue, but isn't going to get me in trouble if I say it this way or that way. So that's the first thing. Sure. The second thing is start ripping the Band-Aids off now. We've talked a lot about sacrifice on this show.
Yes.
Man, the voluntary sacrifice is just so much better for you than waiting until you're unprepared and everything is ripped away from you because you were courageous enough to tell the truth. Rip the Band-Aids off now. And then when things do get taken away, you're accustomed to it. That's a suffering that you're at least used to.
Even on a human level, that's stoicism, right?
Yeah.
Even on a strictly human level, Marcus Aurelius, we're talking about these kinds of things, which, by the way, used to be embraced by masculinity, right? I'm saying that, but your point's well taken, and you're, by ripping off that Band-Aid, you're practicing a form of detachment.
Mm-hmm. And the last thing I would say is premeditation. So premeditation is something that was pretty avidly taught by moral theologians, Catholic moral theologians, for a long time. And that's the idea that we should occasionally sit down and think about likely scenarios. And then imagine ourselves in those likely scenarios and think about what the right thing to do is in those scenarios, and then commit to doing that if those scenarios ever come up.
Fantastic.
It's such an obvious one, and yet very few people do it that I'm aware of. It's kind of a lost art, if you will, in the church. The idea of like, someone's going to put this piece of paper in front of me probably at some point and ask me to sign it. What am I going to do? Am I going to be a coward? Am I going to fumble some words and then back out and then just sign the thing and say, well, a signature doesn't mean anything, apply the principle of double effect in my mind as quickly as possible and move on? Or am I going to be courageous and say, no, premeditate those things? And that doesn't mean you have to go down the rabbit hole and imagining every possible thing under the sun.
No, right.
But the things that are likely in your life to come up, that you're going to be questioned about, or someone's going to confront you on, be ready to tell the truth.
Like a great athlete visualizes scoring a goal, right? And so it's like, what would I do in that situation? And the other takeaway I would add to this, and Bug, I think you're not trying to pump you up here, but I'm saying in all sincerity, one of the other takeaways was also understanding principles and where they come from. Do some work, start reading. Where do these principles come from? And, one of the things I really enjoy about talking to you is you're very well read, and you have taken the time to formulate your thoughts and philosophy, and you back them up. Like, I don't know how many times I say, well, and because of a Thomistic thought, and here's, and you kind of go down this path. And whenever you do that, right, I'm just being honest, I listen to you and I go, wow, I have more work to do. Because I literally will take what you're saying and I will look into it. I'll consider what you just said. And we all have to do that because, and by the way, there's a beautiful little secret here. When people come to us for, quote, advice, we don't have to give advice, but what we can do is have a discussion on principles.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. That's always my approach. I'm very, very cautious about advice because, I will be judged for every bit of bad advice I've ever given.
Yes.
And circumstances are real. That's why the application of principles will vary wildly from person to person and still be the highest good, right? That's an important thing to really recognize. But I can walk you through the principles on a great many things, and I think it's really important. It's important to understand the principles. It's important to understand what the church teaches objectively, and then you can lay that out for people and lay it out plainly and let them choose it. Let them choose it or reject it and say, well, these are just the principles. I can't know your circumstances fully. Every set of circumstances has more widgets than even the person in the circumstance is usually able to recognize, right?
Right, and because we stand for a principle, we're not looking to destroy you or anybody else, but these principles are true regardless of the, quote, tyranny of nuance.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, that's it. And then it's up to you. You can tyrannize yourself with nuance if you so choose, and bury yourselves in all the circumstantial details in order to avoid the principle. You can reject the principle altogether. You can recognize the ideal and appropriate the principle to yourself while also recognizing that you're weak.
Sure.
I mean, the majority of what I believe is true and good,
Okay.
I fall short of every day. And some things I choose to fall short of because I know my weaknesses, and I know that stealing what will I have that I'm using in other areas is going to diminish me in a way that I won't recover from at any given moment, right? So, for instance on that is, I would love to watch zero entertainment. I know that that's what would be best for me, is to actually watch zero entertainment, to play with my family and read books only. I'm certain of that. I'm watching Lord of the Rings right now with my wife.
Well, it is a great movie.
It's a great movie. It's taken us, the first two movies took us like 3 weeks watching them like 20 minutes at a time, right? And that's nice. That's a lower good. That's not an evil
Sure.
thing. It's a lower good. I also know that I would be a more virtuous man if I was so detached from entertainment that I had no interest in it. That's a fact.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right, but also on the other side of that equation, uh, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. That seems like a if you're going to have a pursuit, it's pretty nice downtime for you and your wife, right? To do that,
It
do a
is.
great,
It
right?
is. You know what? I'll tell you. One Lent, we gave up all entertainment, except for audiobooks, and
Oh,
we would sit and just listen to. We were listening to C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce.
oh,
I would
yeah.
pause. I would pause and explain things and walk through the imagery for my wife. That was 1,000 times more unitive.
Oh, yeah, man. Okay, I got you. Right,
It was
right.
it was far more unitive. It was a more pure version of eutrapelia that was in my opinion a higher good than sitting and watching a movie together.
Yes.
Um, and when we first started courting, I used to read to her a lot. I would just sit and read writings of the saints. I would read Saint Francis of Assisi's Introduction to the Devout Life, and we would pause and talk and discuss. If there's anyone out there that thinks sitting and watching a movie is more unitive or more valuable to a relationship than sitting and reading the lives of the saints or writings of the saints out loud and then pausing and discussing, if they think that the former is more valuable than the latter, you're just wrong. It's just sorry. But here I am saying that while also calling myself out and saying, look, we but I won't let go of the ideal just because I'm not meeting it, right? Um, I certainly hope that someday me and my wife's unitive eutrapelia time will be sitting and reading beautiful things together.
Sure, sure. By the way, I'm reminded of your wife because I still can't get out of my mind the inadequacies of democracy and Barabbas. That no, no. Honestly, that has been. If you could please pass that along to her, that has been on my mind, and I went, "Wow, that
she
really hit
has
me."
she has these great home run moments, and that was one of
Man,
them.
that was a whole. And I went,
Yeah,
you can even see my face. I went, "Whoa!" I
yeah.
went. A bunch of people commented on that, by the way, yeah, and to your point, right? That's exactly what you're saying. Your use of time on that, and look what you guys came up with.
Mhm,
Honestly, that one knocked me over. I was like, "Whoa, that is
mhm.
like a perfect example." I was like, "Holy cow!"
Yeah.
So, well, Mr. Hall, I think. Do you have anything else? I think we're done, sir.
I think that's it. I think that's all I have to say for now on this topic.
Well, as always, sir, I enjoy our time together, and hopefully you folks at home do as well. Please hit the like and subscribe button, and please pass this along to your friends. We love doing this, but we really want to get this message out. And listen, if you disagree with us, let's be civil about it. No more like we talked about the tyranny of silence. We live in a cancel culture. Like anyone who's written in something really nasty, I said, look, get your act together, and we can have a civil discussion about this if you really would like.
Yeah.
And we have had no takers, have we, Mr. Hall?
Not yet, Mr.
I,
Mon. I would happily discuss any of these issues with anyone else. And I speak plainly, and I think that gives people the impression that I'm stubborn. Uh, I love learning new things. I love
sure.
recognizing when I'm wrong. Nothing feels better to me, just on an emotional level, than recognizing I'm wrong about something. I love that feeling. I love realizing that I've been holding something in error,
Yes.
and this beautiful light illuminates something new because someone is bold enough to argue with me and be clear in their speech. And I go, oh, cool, man. I don't have to hold this error the rest of my life and look like a fool. Thank you.
Yes. But by the way, and and I have been corrected, and I am always grateful for that. And
It's like having something in your teeth.
yeah, you got to. Yeah, perfect.
I mean, that's the analogy. It's like having something in your teeth. There's the person that'll just point it out, and then you're like, great, I don't have to go through the rest of my day with this thing in my teeth, being embarrassed in front of 30 people. Little
Right.
embarrassment now, saving me a bucket full later. Thank you.
On that note, we're gonna say our goodbyes, and this is the 12th station. I'm Jim Maughan with my good friend Mr. Bug Hall, and
Yep.
Viva Cristo Rey.
And pray much, suffer well.
See you guys till next time. Bye bye.